We have used AI to create a powerful face-off religious debate between a Christian and an atheist. In the debate, they confront humanity's most profound questions. Does God exist? What defines morality? Did God cause the original sin? Get ready to watch how faith and reason go head-to-head in a clash of ideas like never before. Let's dive in.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Great, thanks. Nice to meet you too.
So my first question to you is, as a Christian, why do you think it's more probable that there is a God than there isn't?
Well, the reason why I believe that God exists is because life always comes from life. Everywhere I look, in nature, in science, in my own experience, I see that living things come from other living things. A tree doesn't grow from a rock. A child doesn't come from dead matter. Even in the most complex labs, scientists haven't been able to create true life from non-life. That's not just biology. That's a pattern, a principle. So when I think about the beginning of everything, the universe, life, consciousness, I find it far more reasonable to believe that there was a living source behind it all. Not just an explosion of particles or energy randomly aligning to create life, but a living, intelligent creator. To say, in the beginning, God created makes more sense to me. When I look at the intricacy of DNA, the laws of physics that seem tuned just right for life, I can't think about anything else but God.
Let me ask you this. Who created God?
God doesn't need a beginning because the God described in the Bible exists outside of time, space, and matter. If he were bound by any of those dimensions, he wouldn't be God. In fact, the very first verse of the Bible addresses this perfectly. In the beginning, that's time. God created the heavens, that's space, and the earth, that's matter. Time, space, and matter see how all brought into existence in a single sentence. The God who created the universe is not confined by it. He is above it, beyond it, outside of it, yet still present within it. He is not affected by the limitations of the universe because he designed them. That's what makes him God.
So when you say that God doesn't need a beginning, you're essentially suggesting that something can exist without ever coming from anything, that something can come from nothing. Let me put it like this. If it's okay to say that God doesn't need a beginning, then why isn't it okay to say the universe doesn't need one either?
This question, who made God, is a total fallacy. It makes no sense at all. If God could be made, then naturally we'd ask, well, who made that God? And then who made the God before that? And on it would go, spiraling into an endless loop of creators creating creators. Eventually we could still arrive at a being that wasn't made at all, a being that is uncreated, self-existent, and outside the chain of cause and effect. And that right there is what I mean when I say God.
What I'm saying is, you may argue that everything must have a cause, so the universe must have been created by some super intelligent being. Look at how things work in our world. We don't see complicated things suddenly appear out of nowhere. We see simple things gradually becoming more complex. That's the core idea behind evolution. Whether you believe in it or not, it's backed by evidence. Simple life forms become more advanced over time. That's just how nature works. Even the Big Bang follows a similar logic. It started with a tiny singularity. Then everything we know began to unfold. Stars, galaxies, planets, all from something extremely simple and dense. Now here's the issue. When you say there was an all-powerful, super intelligent being that existed before everything else, you're flipping that logic on its head. You're saying the most complex thing imaginable, a being with no beginning, no creator, unlimited power, existed before the universe and created it all. That's a much bigger leap to accept than the idea that the universe just existed. And look, I'm not a quantum physicist, so I won't pretend to have all the answers. But let's be honest, if we're going to talk about origins, we should apply the same standards of logic and evidence across the board. not just make exceptions when it fits a belief. If God is that powerful, as you say, then why does he let normal, healthy, innocent children die of natural disasters and severe disease? If he is not interested in human intervention, then why even worship him?
When God decided to intervene into human affairs, what happened to him? He got crucified. When I say God is all-powerful, I don't mean that everything that happens is God's will. He chose to limit his power by giving us free will, and there are consequences for that.
If God can't help the child, then he isn't omnipotent. And if he can, but chooses not to, then basically that God is not a good God worthy of worship. And I literally don't think your argument of free will applies to natural disasters like earthquakes that kill thousands of people. If God prevented cancer from growing inside the baby, I don't see how that affects free will. If this God of yours exists, all-powerful, all-loving, why is he not making a choice to stop the sheer suffering?
I really don't know why God chooses not to, but I can tell you this. All this suffering could be the consequences of the original sin. When human beings decided to rebel against God, he stepped back. Because of that disengagement, it started to become chaotic and disastrous. And also, suffering is not all bad. Sometimes it brings about a certain amount of good.
I agree. You might be able to justify suffering to a degree, maybe, but when a child dies of cancer, I literally don't see how that can be justified at all.
As I said, we live in a broken world, a world marred by sin, disease, and injustice, not because God wills suffering, but because humanity was given free will. And with that freedom came consequences. God's original design was never suffering, but love and communion. But even in the face of tragedy, including the death of children, God is not absent. He is present in the pain, weeping with those who weep, John 11:35, and promising eternal comfort for those who are his. Jesus himself said, "Let the little children come to me, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Matthew 19:14. In Christian belief, children who die are not lost. They are received into the arms of a loving God. Their suffering is not in vain, nor is it punishment. It is a temporary shadow in a fallen world, and they are eternally redeemed. But more than that, God does not just watch suffering, he entered into it. In Jesus Christ, God himself suffered. He was betrayed, beaten, and crucified. Christianity does not offer easy answers, but it offers a God who knows suffering personally and who promises that, in the end, he will wipe every tear from every eye. Revelation 21:4. The resurrection is our hope. That death is not the end.
You're saying that children suffer because we live in a broken, sinful world, and that God, in his mercy, receives them into heaven. Well, that raises a fundamental question. If God is all-loving and all-powerful, why allow innocent children to suffer at all? Why not simply create a reality where their innocence is preserved without trauma, pain, or premature death? Why make heaven an after-the-fact reward for enduring something they never chose? Imagine this. I cut off your hand, and afterward I hand you a check for $50,000. Would you call me merciful, or would you rightfully ask why I mutilated you in the first place when I could have just given you the money? That's exactly what you're asking people to believe about God, that he allows children to be born into famine, abuse, disease, and then redeems them afterward by bringing them to heaven. That's not benevolence. It's evil. And if God is not causing the suffering but merely allowing it, then his moral character is still on trial. Allowing preventable suffering when you have the power to stop it is morally indistinguishable from causing it, especially when we're talking about children. You say God weeps with us, but tears don't heal shattered bodies or traumatized minds. And what's the point of omnipotence if it's only used to cry with us rather than stop the cause of the crying in the first place? I don't see that as divine love, but negligence dressed up as empathy.
Hold on a second. When you say two actions are morally indistinguishable, what exactly do you mean by that? Morally according to what? By what standard are you making that judgment? Because if we're being honest, atheism doesn't offer any objective foundation for morality. Without a transcendent moral lawgiver, specifically the God of the Bible, all you're left with is personal preference, social consensus, or evolutionary impulses. But preferences change, societies evolve, and biology doesn't know the difference between rape and rescue. So tell me, what makes something truly right or wrong in your worldview? You see, if there's no God, then there's no binding moral law. And if there's no law, then nothing is ultimately wrong. Not genocide, not slavery, not murder, and it's all just opinion dressed up as outrage. So before you accuse God of wrongdoing, you need to borrow from his standard just to make your claim. Because let's be clear, you can feel that something is wrong, but without an objective moral anchor, your feelings don't amount to moral facts. They're just vibrations in your brain. So when I hear an atheist talk about evil or injustice, I can't help but ask, based on what? From your own worldview, it's all just atoms in motion. But if you're appealing to a standard of good and evil, then you're making a case for God. You literally can't have moral outrage and deny the moral foundation in the same breath.
Let me be perfectly clear. It's not just wrong, it's insulting to suggest that without belief in superstition or without the supernatural, we'd have no idea how to treat each other decently, that we couldn't tell right from wrong or live with integrity, as if morality is some sort of divine permission slip. That idea doesn't elevate human nature. It degrades it. To claim that human beings are inherently incapable of goodness unless they're threatened or bribed by a celestial authority isn't moral guidance. It's moral blackmail. You're telling me that unless we bend the knee to a cosmic dictator, an unchallengeable, invisible enforcer, we're doomed to chaos and immorality. That's not ethics. That's authoritarianism in the sky. Let me ask you something. What kind of morality requires surveillance to function? If you're only being good because you're told, do this or else, then you're not moral. You're obedient. Here's the challenge, and I've yet to hear a convincing answer. Name me one ethical statement made or one moral action taken by a believer that a non-believer couldn't also say or do. Just one. You won't find it. Because morality doesn't require mythology. Compassion doesn't need commandments. Secular people love their children. They defend justice. They sacrifice for others. Not because a book told them to, but because they understand the human condition. Because empathy, reason, and shared humanity are far more powerful motivators than fear of divine punishment. If your morals come only from a deity, then you're not choosing right from wrong. You're following orders.
Again, if morality is entirely subjective, just personal preference or cultural habit, then how can you condemn anything as truly wrong? If there's no fixed standard, then why should anyone go to jail? Why punish murder, assault, theft? Maybe the criminal believes what they did was right. Who are you to say otherwise? You see, once you strip morality of any objective foundation, you're left with chaos dressed up as choice. Like, you may feel that something is wrong, and someone else may feel it's perfectly fine. Without a moral lawgiver and an objective source of right and wrong, you're stuck in a world where you can't truly say Hitler was wrong just because you didn't like what he did. Sure, we can write laws, but laws change. Slavery was once legal. Deep down, we all know some things are just wrong, and that knowing doesn't come from evolution or opinion. It comes from a higher standard. It comes from God. Now, here's where it gets even more powerful. If God exists and if he is the moral lawgiver, then we must ask, what did this God do about the evil in the world? Did he just hand us rules and walk away? No, he did something unimaginable. He entered the broken world himself. He didn't just preach morality, he embodied it. Jesus Christ took on human flesh, lived a perfect, sinless life, and in the greatest act of moral courage and love ever recorded, he died on the cross. Not for his sins, but for ours. To offer forgiveness, to offer hope, to restore what sin
come on. Let's
destroyed.
Stop romanticizing this. The story of God dying for humanity might sound noble on the surface, but when you actually think about it, it's nothing more than cosmic theater, ghastly, self-inflicted drama with a blood-soaked twist. This all-powerful God of yours creates the entire universe and then deliberately ruins everything by setting up a trap for his creation. He plants a forbidden tree right in the middle of paradise, knowing full well that his beloved creations, Adam and Eve, who he apparently made naive and fallible, will fail. So he screwed up everything, and then he came up with a foolish, ghastly plan to try to fix it. He decides to fix this disaster with what can only be called the most bizarre solution ever imagined. He sacrifices himself to save his creation from himself. Tell me, how is that not fallacious? How is that not absurd? And why the blood? Why the torture? Why the crucifixion? He's omnipotent, isn't he? He could have just forgiven humanity with just a word, with a breath, but no. He chooses nails, thorns, and death. If you call it salvation, I call it self-masochism. It seems like this loving God of yours is bloodthirsty, obsessed with sacrifice, always craving pain, and somehow we're supposed to worship it.
You're literally missing the bigger picture here. You keep pointing the finger at God like he's the villain of the story. But let's get something straight. God didn't make the choice. Adam and Eve did. Let's not ignore what actually happened in the Garden of Eden. God didn't force Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In fact, he did the opposite. He warned them. He gave them clear instructions. Do not eat from this tree or you will surely die. That wasn't a trap. That was a warning from a loving creator. And here's the part you're missing out on. Free will. God gave us the ability to choose. He didn't create robots. He created beings capable of love, loyalty, and yes, even rebellion. So when Adam and Eve reached out and took that fruit, it wasn't because God made them do it. It was because they chose to. That's where sin entered the picture. Not by God's design, but through human defiance. And yet, despite that rebellion, God didn't abandon us. He made another choice, one you can't dismiss lightly. He chose to rescue us, to enter his own creation in the person of Jesus, to suffer, to die, and to rise again. Not because he had to, but because he loves us. So no, God didn't cause the chaos. Humanity did. Despite of being rejected, still God chose to offer redemption. That's not cruelty. That's grace. And yes, we need to worship and glorify him because he is deserving.
You talk about free will like it solves everything, but it actually creates a much bigger problem. Let me ask you something simple. Can we really have free will if your God already knows everything we're going to do? You say that Adam and Eve chose to sin, but according to your theology, God is omniscient. He knew they would fall before he even created them. He knew every detail, every mistake, every tragedy, every soul that would be lost. And what did he do with that knowledge? He created them anyway. That's not freedom. That's setting the stage for failure and calling it love. Let's be honest, if I build a machine knowing full well it's going to malfunction and kill people, am I innocent? No. I'm responsible because I knew what would happen, and I did it anyway. Your God did the same, but now you want to blame the creation instead of the creator? You can't have it both ways. If God is all-knowing, then our decisions were already part of the plan. They weren't a surprise. So either we don't have true free will, or God isn't as all-knowing as you claim. Pick one, because you can't have both without running into a wall of contradiction. And if God planned to send Jesus to fix a mess he knew would happen, how is that grace? That's just a cleanup duty for a disaster he scheduled. So, no, I'm not buying this whole free will saves God from blame routine. Find another way to defend your God. All right, let's pause it here, because honestly, we could go back and forth on this all day.
Wait, before we close, I have a question for you. If Christianity was true, would you be a Christian?
If Christianity were objectively true, and there were solid, undeniable evidence to back it up, then yes, I'd have no problem accepting it. But if you're asking whether I'd become a Christian just because I felt convinced the way you are, based on faith, emotion, or personal experience, then no, I wouldn't.
Fair enough.